Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here for my Friday reads. I read 2 books last week, the first one being The Magician by W. Somerset Maugham, and this was read as a buddy read with Alan from Big Hard Books and Classics. And I admit I struggled getting into it at first. So it is the story of Margaret and Arthur. Margaret was orphaned at the age of 10, and Arthur, who is several years older than her, ends up becoming her guardian and looking after her until the age of 17 when he proposes because he's fallen in love with her. And it is an older novel, and so I suppose at the time that was more acceptable. It seems creepy to us now, but it was a common fictional trope back in the day. So Margaret has gone to Paris at the beginning of the novel, and she has been studying art and living with her old maid, and I use that term loosely, old maid friend, Susie. Susie is serving as a sort of chaperone, although Susie herself is only somewhere around the age of 30. So she's still quite a young woman herself, but Margaret is around the age of 19 or 20 when the novel opens, and her marriage to Arthur is impending. It's coming very soon. And she is in love with Arthur because of who he is, but also partly out of a sense of obligation because she found out at a certain point that her father had died bankrupt and that all these years, without her realizing it, she had been spending Arthur's money. And so she is perfectly prepared to marry Arthur until she meets Oliver Hadow. And Alan informed me as we were reading that Oliver Hadow is actually loosely based on a real life person by the name of Crowley. And that Crowley was very interested in the occult and that he published books on the subject. But that W. Somerset Maugham didn't perhaps like Crowley all that much. And so he is portrayed in the book as Oliver Hadow. Of course, he takes Hadow's character much farther and much darker than Crowley was in real life. The novel itself has gothic elements to it. It reminded me in some ways of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, because you have this couple who's about to be married, and then this dark figure sort of comes onto the scene and tries to seduce Margaret away from Arthur through insidious means, through the use of magic. Of course, the real mystery here is, how much of it is magic and how much of it is Margaret, in reality, actually herself being fascinated with this man. And Oliver Hadow does some pretty dark things. Animals are afraid of him. They instantly become combative as soon as he gets near them. So a cat or a horse, for instance, there's a scene where he ends up throwing a dog because the dog has sort of come at him out of fear. And there's this ridiculous scene where a grudge is born because Oliver has been attacked by the dog. He ends up, throwing the dog across the room and nearly injuring it. And somebody punches him in a fit of rage over what he's done to the dog, thus spurring the other events of the novel. And I'm told by Alan that a lot of the passages in this book that deal with magic and with the occult are based on real life texts about the occult and magic. So it's a, in air quotes, factual book in that sense. But when I got to the ending of the book, it's not really what I was expecting, because up until a point, the novel had been fairly grounded in reality, and then it really picks up sort of that horror and supernatural element in the end, which I found quite interesting and exciting to read. So overall, I enjoyed this one. Not too thrilled about, just to throw it out, the portrayal of women in this novel. Margaret herself is sort of at the will of these magic powers, and then you have Susie, who fancies Arthur herself and isn't that strong of a female character either. But putting that aside, it was a very entertaining novel. Definitely different than anything else that I've read by W. Somerset Maugham. Most of his novels are very based in reality and are what we would call literary fiction, where this is definitely more of a genre novel. And if I had to label it as anything, I would label it as a horror novel. Horror in the sense of, Frankenstein or Bram Stoker or something along those lines. So I read that. And then last night I opened up this little slim volume, which is nonfiction, and it's called A Degree of Mastery, A Journey Through Book Art's Apprenticeship by Annie Trema Wilcox. And this was published in the late 90s. And I am lost for the moment as to where I got the recommendation for it. I know it appeared on someone's BookTube channel recently. I think it might have been Jason Harrigan, but I don't know for sure. All I know is that it arrived in the mail yesterday and I immediately picked it up to read it around 9 o'clock. I was close to putting it down. I was halfway done. Thought I would leave it until the morning, but I found myself finishing it just because it was so interesting. And it is the memoir of a woman in the United States who studied as a bookbinder's apprentice. And her work was at a university in their rare books department. And so the work involved not only learning to rebind old books, but also restoration work. And she outlines not only her personal journey in learning about bookbinding and the book arts, and her personal journey in choosing that as a career path, but also many of the techniques that she herself learned to use in her work. So for instance, how to patch pages, how to clean the page of an old book, how to sew the binding of a book. And she also talked about some of the notable works that she was given the task of restoring. So for instance, she worked on 2 different editions of William Blake's Songs of Innocence at the same time. And of course, they were in different stages, and so she would work on multiple books at once. But she notes that it was very important not to accidentally get the pages of the 2 editions mixed up, because that was certainly something you didn't want to do, as, at least in my understanding, every edition of Songs of Innocence by William Blake that he produced was slightly different. Since all the illustrations were hand-colored in by him, the colors would differ based on different editions. And it all accumulates in her mentor restoring the state constitution and her having a small role in doing that. And I was quite taken with the process, with this idea of building your own tools. So as she says, there isn't a set of tools for bookmakers to use. Rather, it's all about them, borrowing from other professions. Maybe you take some tools from carpentry. Maybe you take some tools from, visual arts. Maybe you are looking in the hardware section at the local hardware store. And then once you get these tools, you are forming them and manipulating them to suit your purposes. And she describes her mentor coming in with a hacksaw and showing her how to make her own tools out of the blade of this hacksaw to do her work. And the man who taught her, let me just remember his name, William Anthony, was actually from Ireland, and he'd apprenticed in Ireland. And so he had a very traditional approach to learning bookbinding. He only took on several apprentices at a time, and he was all about, learning by doing, visual learning. Our author, Annie, was very into taking meticulous notes, and he kept trying to discourage her from it. But as she notes here, since they were in a library, sometimes she would learn to do something and do it maybe once or twice, and then she wouldn't do it again for 6 or 8 months. Whereas his apprenticeship in Ireland was very much okay, you learn to do this, and now you might do 6, 7, 700 of these in a row. And overall, just a very interesting memoir, something I would highly recommend reading if you're at all interested in the physical restoration and binding process for books. So that is what I read in the past week, but October is quickly coming upon us, and I haven't thought about until today what I'm going to read for Victober. I don't usually pay attention to the prompts or anything, but I do like to pick a couple pieces of Victorian literature every October to sort of join in the occasion. And so I think I'm finally going to read George Eliot's Middlemarch. And this is a lovely edition from 1888 that has been sitting on my bookshelf for going on 5 or 6 years now. I've never read it. The only thing by Eliot I've read is The Mill on the Floss, which I found quite melodramatic at the end. So we'll see if this one also has a melodramatic ending. I do believe Middlemarch is her most well-known novel, and it is about 2 orphan sisters in a provincial English town. I get the impression they will be seeing suitors and marrying, and perhaps discovering the not-so-wedded bliss. But I'll see how it turns out. I do love this edition, even if it is a bit dusty and browned on the inside, but that'll be good to finally read that. And if I'm still feeling motivated when I finish Middlemarch, I do have The American Senator by Anthony Trollope, which arrived earlier this week. This is something I purchased with the Chapters Indigo gift card I got for my birthday, and it took forever to arrive. And so this one is a standalone novel, I believe. And on the back it says his main concern is with materialism seen through the eyes of Mr. Gotobed, an American senator, who is invited to the small country town of Dillsborough. There, during one winter season, he observes English country life in all its social aspects, from the richest of peers to the poorest of farmers. He witnesses intrigue, romance, and Arabella Trefoil's determined stalking of the wealthy but elusive Lord Rutherford, while still engaged to a diplomat, John Morton. Arabella emerges as one of Trollope's most vivid protagonists in a novel that is an indictment of the materialism of Victorian England. So that one sounds quite exciting as well. So that's what I've got tentatively on the table for October, for Victober. We'll see if I actually make my way through them, because I still have a whole bunch of other books still on my currently reading table that I do need to return to, those being the Journals of Dorothy Wordsworth I've been dipping into, Biographia Literaria by Coleridge, which has been sitting for a month without me giving it any attention, the biography of Alexander Mackenzie, which I read half of in the beginning of August and then abandoned, and of course the Balzac. I do have the Balzac volumes, and I do want to finish volume 1 in the month of October, if not in this coming week. So that is what I'm up to this Friday. And I hope you're all doing well. Do let me know what you're planning to read for Victober, if anything, in the comments below, and what you're up to this lovely weekend.